This is Matt Rosen, and this is The Grit Mindset with me, your host, Matt Rosen. The mission of The Grit Mindset is to inspire and empower our listeners by delving deep into the journeys of those who have faced significant challenges and emerged stronger. Through authentic conversations, we uncover the mindsets, strategies, and lessons that have propelled these individuals to overcome adversity and achieve success. My aim is to provide actionable insights and real-world advice to help our listeners cultivate their own grit and navigate their personal and professional lives with confidence and resilience. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of The Grit Mindset. I'm your host, Matt Rosen. Here with me today is a friend, Scott Wood. He is the CEO and co-founder of True North Advisors. He also has a podcast called Decision Points that is nice enough to host me on. And so wanted to have him on The Grit Mindset here today to share his story. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, well, to get us started, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what True North does?
Sure. So born and raised in Dallas.
Nice.
So that's becoming less and less.
Yeah, there's not that many natives.
That's right. So born and raised here. Waco for school, for college, and then some time in New York, and then I've been pretty much back here since 1992, building a wealth management business.
Nice. Well, tell us about that. Like, who do you serve? What do you do?
Yeah, so the company's True North Advisors. We started in 2000. It's a combination of a multi-family office offering along with an alternative investment platform. So we kind of run both of those businesses. When we started the business, there was really a couple things that were important to us. One, there were huge conflicts of interest in the industry, and really still are today, surprisingly. But we wanted to see if we could build a structure that would eliminate the conflicts of interest. We wanted to build an enterprise, so we didn't want to just have a practice. We wanted to build something that we could scale. And then the third thing was really just to build a unified team. So if you look at our industry, most brokers or producers are sort of siloed in the way they do business. Yeah. And we just felt like if we could leverage a large team and the strengths and weaknesses of everybody on the team, we have 70 people today.
Oh, wow. It's a big shop.
Then you could really create a better experience for the client. So that was sort of the goal in 2000 when we started, in the teeth of the bear market of 2000. And, fast forward today, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of challenges, which I know we'll talk about today.
Yeah. Yeah, so did you wake up one day at, Baylor and decide, hey, I want to be a wealth manager when I grew up? Or how did you fall into this?
That's a great question. I mean, I probably didn't fall into it in the best way. I was sitting in a finance class in summer school after my junior year, between junior and senior year. And, I'll date myself, but this was the time of the original Wall Street movie with Charlie Sheen and Michael Douglas.
Greed is Good.
Yeah, Greed is Good. And the other movie that was, sort of completely opposite of that was The Secret of My Success with Michael J. Fox.
Yeah.
He moves from Kansas to New York. And so there was this idea of kind of, moving from Dallas or Waco to New York City. So I sort of got that in my head, and then this whole idea of Wall Street. And, I don't even know that I really knew what Wall Street was. I just knew that, greed is good. You could make a decent amount of money. There was a pivotal moment. We had a guy come visit our class, and the professor teed it up like this. He said, hey, on Thursday, this was Tuesday, on Thursday, we're going to have this guy from Dallas. He works at Smith Barney. I do remember his name was Scott. His name's Scott. He's been out of school, a couple of years, and he's making six figures, and he's driving a red sports car. And I was like, sign me up for that.
I want to meet him.
Yeah. So this guy comes to speak, and he's a stockbroker at Smith Barney at the time, and was doing really well and successful. And I was kind of like, okay, well, that sort of seems interesting. So you sort of marry that, with the technical aspect of investing, and then this whole Wall Street sort of thing that was going on in the late '80s. So I was fortunate enough to get a job out of Baylor in New York City with Chase Manhattan Bank.
Okay.
This was back in the day where I sent out a ton of resumes by mail, with a postage stamp, and followed up by phone, and applied to all these different shops, and never really got, what I would call a Wall Street job. I went to work for Chase Bank, which was a commercial bank, but they did open an investment advisory group while I was in my first year there, and was able to navigate to that group pretty early on. So I got hired into a training program that rotated through different areas of the bank, but then found this investment group. And This was in 1989, 90, and this group was starting to build a fee-based advisory business using non-proprietary third-party vehicles, investment vehicles.
And for our listeners, what does that mean, fee-based versus what?
Yeah, so at that time, usually, if you had an account at Merrill Lynch, and not to pick on Merrill Lynch, but if you had any big brokerage firm, all the product that was being offered was being manufactured within the business and then sold on commission. So the advisor got paid whether or not the client made money or not.
Right.
And so the idea with the fee-based business was that you would pay a fee. If your assets grew, the fee would grow. And if your assets shrank, the fee would shrink. So there was some alignment. And the broker advisor wasn't paid to pitch a product. They were really paid to design a solution. And so that was just sort of beginning in the early 90s. And Chase had started this business, and I was fortunate enough to start working as sort of a junior analyst for that group.
Gotcha. So were there any Gordon Gekko types that you worked with at Chase?
There were, so it was interesting. This was a little startup business. Yeah. And, Chase in New York was gigantic. I mean, they were huge. And so we were officing in Lower Manhattan, and, they had offices in, multiple buildings. Yeah. There was the Chase headquarters, but then we were in a little offshoot building that was kind of a higher end building, and it had some C-suite Chase execs, and then we were sort of down the hall on the floor in a bunch of cubicles as a startup within the larger Chase. So I sort of watched all these senior execs, and I mean, they were all dressed to the nines, and I mean, it was very much like the movies, and hardwood paneled offices, and I got to kind of observe a little bit of that as we were getting started.
Yeah. So you got your start on Wall Street, kind of. And what was the path that took you from, hey, I'm working for someone else, to I want to become an entrepreneur and do my own thing? Yeah,
so it was a series of sort of fortuitous things. I think it's important to note that, like, my paternal grandfather was an entrepreneur. My dad was an entrepreneur. My mom was an entrepreneur.
What kind of businesses were they in?
So my grandfather, he had a lighting store. So it was actually not far from here. Maybe less than a mile from here where we're producing this, called Dallas Lighting Center.
Okay.
And they were marketing and selling light fixtures and to the North Dallas boom, which at the time was, everything north of LBJ,
yeah.
Right? So he had that lighting store, and so that was his business. And then my dad was a home builder, and then eventually ran that business for my grandfather. My mom was an interior designer, independent, So there's always sort of that entrepreneurial sort of nature. And, when I was younger, I mowed yards and threw newspapers and, did a lot of things in high school and college growing up that were sort of entrepreneurial in nature.
That seems to be a common thing of the entrepreneurs we have on here. My first job was Washington Post.
Yeah.
As a paper boy, and mowed lawn, same thing. Any key takeaways, that being around those entrepreneurs instilled in you at a young age?
Yeah, I think so. When I worked at the lighting center for multiple summers, and then in high school throughout the year. And I think it was interesting because they had salespeople that worked the retail floor, and they would all sit behind the desk and wait for people to come up to them. And I was like, that's not. I mean, I just, even at 16, 17 years old, I was like, that's. So I would go up and stand by the front door, and as soon as somebody came in, I was like, hey, how can I help you? And it just struck me that, if you just kind of show up and do the work and be a little bit proactive, good things can happen. And, at that point I was on commission with my dad and my grandfather. And I mean, I outsold many of the, folks that were, sort of permanent salespeople, just because I stood at the front door and waited for opportunities.
Because you engaged the customers as they walked in, met them where they were, versus waiting for them to come to you.
And then I think also just what other things were in there. It's just sort of, I always kind of had my way of doing things, and probably wasn't great at being told how to do things, and just always had a little bit of a quarter turn on, oh, I think we can do that better, or we can do that faster, or we can do that more efficiently. And so that's always sort of been in there, and probably still is in there today. But, so I think there was some early, and I didn't even really know the word entrepreneur, when I was in high school or even college. Most of the people around us in the neighborhood worked for companies. And so it was just sort of seemed the guy next door. This also played into how did I get to the banking and finance. But, the most successful guy in our neighborhood was a bachelor who ran Bent Tree National Bank, and drove a red Mercedes and was a member of Bent Tree Country Club. And at the time, that was all, I was just sort of enamored by all that because we didn't, our family didn't operate that way. And I was like, okay, that guy must do pretty well and he's in banking. So there was sort of these two different themes, right? There was that corporate theme that sort of was, okay, I can see a pathway here to, do well and provide for a family. But then there was also this sort of entrepreneurial DNA, if you will. So, kind of back to your question about how did we get to the entrepreneurial endeavor of True North, Chase ended up liquidating the business in sort of like 6-7 years in. So Chase and Chemical Bank merged. Chemical Bank was the lead bank. When big mergers happen, they're looking for cost cutting and how do they strip out cost. This entity was losing money at the time because it was still early on in its development and they'd grown aggressively. So we became free agents in kind of mid-90s. And I had since moved to Dallas, started building a client base. The group I was working with in Dallas, there were 4 or 5 of us, all kind of started looking around together to see, okay, where do we want to go? And Chase was kind in the sense that they gave us a 6-month runway of, we're going to close the business. You guys have some time to go figure out where you want to go. So it gave us the time to really shop around. And so I knew I didn't want to go into a brokerage firm because of the potential conflicts. I'd already sort of seen the light with the fee-based RIA, non-proprietary product approach. I knew that was the right approach. The problem was there really weren't any offerings out there that supported that. And so I found a company called Lockwood Financial, which I would describe Lockwood as the plumbing of our industry. So, when you go to open an account at a big brokerage firm, you don't really think about the custody and all the things that go on behind it. It just happens, right? And so, but if you're going to go hang your shingle, like you got to figure all that stuff out. So Lockwood sort of figured all that out for the independent advisor or producer. So they were a startup themselves. Okay. So I left Chase, I joined them as a producing employee. They really didn't want producing employees. They wanted to do this for independent advisors as independent contractors. But they said, look, you guys can join us, the Dallas office, and grow your business. And when you're big enough to go out on your own, you guys can flip the switch and just be independent.
Nice.
And I was like, okay, that sounds pretty good. And it really, at that point, I didn't know that independence was even a thing. And so joined them in 95, and then from 95 to 2000, just continued to grow my book of business. And my business partner, co-founder Mark Gelbach, joined in 98. He had been at Smith Barney in San Antonio. So we joined forces and then began to incubate True North. And really, once I got to Lockwood and figured out that you could be independent at basically 100 million of assets under management, I was kind of like, okay, we just got to get to 100 million and then we can go. And so in 2000, we flipped the switch and still on the Lockwood platform, still using their plumbing, so to speak. But then we just got started and kind of the rest is history.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be challenging, at least you're from Dallas, but convincing people, hey, I can manage your money better than one of these big banks. How did you build that book? What was the challenges?
Yeah, so in the early days when I was with Chase, Chase had a referral program with the mortgage group. So, one quick story, I know we talk about grit on your podcast.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that came up early was Chase had a mortgage group in Austin, but no investment office in Austin. So all the mortgage lenders in Austin are like, hey, we got all these referrals, but nobody's coming down here. And so the guy that was running the Dallas office, his name was Bob, and Bob said, does anybody want to go to Austin? And I was like, yeah, I'll go to Austin. None of the other guys wanted to commit to go to Austin every 2 weeks to get these referrals. And I was like, yeah, I'll go,
So raise your hand, put yourself out there.
Yeah. And so, I had a Jeep Wrangler, get on I-35 with a soft top, drive to Austin, stay in a Motel 6, like very efficient, cost-effective strategy. But I would go down there every 2 weeks and meet with these mortgage lenders and essentially they'd make referrals, and they had all the financials because they just financed the mortgage. And so it was a very warm handoff, and I ended up building a really nice book initially from that. That was one aspect. And then, I think as we grew in the business, just differentiating our approach and how we did things. But, even when I started True North, I was 32 years old. So very difficult for people to just, turn over all of their liquidity to you at 32.
Sure.
So, I mean, I would say it was slower in the beginning, but, you just persevere. You just keep going.
Yeah. So obviously we're on the grit mindset. And I'd like to hear, a challenging story about building the firm. But before we do that, what would you say your definition of grit is? Because I ask every guest that.
Yeah. For me, I say this to myself. I don't say it out loud so much, but like, I may not be the most credentialed or grew up in the, right neighborhood or went to the right school. I didn't go to bad schools, but I didn't go to any Ivy League school or anything like that. And so, I sort of have this mindset that, there's people may have other things in their orbit that, sort of make them look more successful or whatever, but like no one's going to outwork me. And so with grit, I kind of liken it to just work. Like you just buckle down and you just do the work. And at the end of the day, like I just think that pays dividends. I tell my kids all the time, well, when they were little, they're older now, but when they were little and I drop them off for school, I just say, work hard, serve the Lord, do your best, and be a leader.
Yeah.
Like, and if you can do those things, like life's going to turn out okay for you.
Generally it does.
Yeah. So that's kind of been, so I think when I think about grit, it's do the work. And then I also think there are times when you've got to double down and you've really got to sort of reach down inside and go, okay, this is going to be hard. It's going to be much harder than I thought. And I've got to either opt in or opt out.
Tell us a story about one of those times for you.
Yeah. So the one that always comes to mind, and I've shared this before, but we were on a growth path and everything was working pretty well. And, as we talked about off camera before we started, our space is very active from an M&A perspective. Mm-hmm. And this goes back really even, 15, 20 years ago. So in, kind of 5, 6, 7 years in, so this is 2005 to 2007, 8 timeframe, we started contemplating the idea of, hey, are there some other advisors that might want to join us? And we don't have enough time to go through all the failures, but I'll talk about one in particular. And so we found a guy that was a little bit older and was wanting to, kind of, sunset and, sell his practice, work for a couple of years, and then, transition out. Seemed like a great plan. And so we bought his business. We had the goal was he was going to be out in 2 years. We hired some additional advisors to help serve his relationships. We made a critical error in our structure. We had a non-compete. He wanted to negotiate out the non-compete. And I was like, yeah, I don't think that's a good idea. And I'm still, early 30s, mid 30s at this point. I'm like, I don't think that's a good idea. So we did a 7-year non-compete. The mistake that we made is that the 7-year non-compete started when we closed the transaction, not when he retired. So 2 years came and went. And he's like, well, I think I want to work 1 more year. Well, I got some health issues. I need to stay on the health insurance. I think I need to work 1 more year. Well, we don't have quite the right people servicing the relationship, so I probably need to stay on 1 more year. So 7 years in a day, he's out the door after we'd paid, I think we paid him over a 5-year period of time. So he'd gotten all his money, stayed for an extra 2 years, and then out the door, pretty much took all the clients with them at that point. And so huge mistake. The problem is where this gets really challenging is obviously it stripped a lot of free cash flow out of the business. I mean, when you lose a bunch of AUM, your margin goes down pretty quickly. So the value of the business went down dramatically because of the loss of free cash flow. But worse than that, he knew this was his plan all along. And he knew that this was what he was going to do. So at every point along the way, he would try to poison different members of the team and sort of turn them against me or our co-founder, Mark. I think he had more of a vendetta for me than Mark, but not sure why, but just the way it was. And so he would just, like if we would say something, he would sort of behind the scenes say that, that idea or that whatever they're thinking about, or they have no idea what they're talking about. And, this is an older guy who's more seasoned, and, he would do things like buy you a new set of tires for your car. And so he would sort of buy people's loyalty by sort of pseudo generosity. And so it was bad enough that he left. It was bad enough that he took all the clients. It was bad enough that he destroyed the cash flow. It was bad enough that we made a bunch of mistakes in the structure. But he'd also poisoned the whole team.
That sucks.
And so we had to literally for the next, kind of 3-4 years, totally rebuild the business. I mean, at the time we were probably, 600-700 million of AUM, and he was 175 million of that. So,
Wow, it's almost a 4th-year business walked out the door with
yes. And then we started losing employees because they didn't know who to trust and what was going on. And of course he's gone, but he's still talking to people. And so we just had this attrition. And there was literally a moment, one morning I'm in my study at home and I'm, kind of getting prepared to tackle the day. And I was like paralyzed. Like I was just like, I just don't know that I can go into the office today and do this again, because we're calling clients and trying to get them to stay. And now we got lawsuits going. And I mean, it's just a mess. And I'm not a lawsuit person. I mean,
They're
I'm
no
like,
fun. No one wins but the lawyers.
yeah, I mean, I'm just like, I'm, what you see is what you get, and very transparent and, hopefully honest and ethical about everything that I do. And so like to be in a lawsuit just was very counter to who I am as a person. And so all this stuff is going on. And I just had this moment, this epiphany where it's like, get up, go get in the shower, put your suit on and go work. And then do it again tomorrow, and do it again the next day, and do it again the next day, and do it again the next day. And it was a spiritual moment for sure. And I didn't know when that was going to end. I just knew that's what I needed to do.
Yeah.
So I got up, put my suit on, went to the office and just grinded. And it was probably 2 or 3 years. It felt like an eternity, but it was a couple of years. And then, we got the right people on the bus and we got the wrong people off the bus. And, we started growing again and things eventually got back to normal. But it was a really, really difficult time. But what I learned was how important culture is and how important your people are. And, to this day, like we are maniacal about culture and, the people that we hire. I sat with a young lady yesterday who's going to be a new operations analyst for us. And she said to me at the end of our time together, she goes, I just got to know, like, you blocked an hour. I'm an entry-level position person. Why are you spending an hour with me? And it gave me the opportunity to say, I didn't tell her this whole story, but I was basically like, our culture is super important. And so I need to sit with you and hear from you things that are going to align with our culture and not be in conflict with our culture. So, all the way fast forward to today, like the culture is super important. And that was the big takeaway from that experience. And we knew we wanted a good culture before. We just didn't know how to nurture it and how to protect it. Now we do.
Yeah. Well, it seems like you exhibited your very definition of grit. You didn't want to go to the office, but you got up and went in and just grinded. Talk about just for a sec your culture and what it means to you and what it's all about.
Yeah, I think everybody talks about culture, right? Yeah. And so I say a couple things within our organization. One is that culture is everybody's responsibility. So, with a team of 70, like every single person on the team is responsible for the culture that we have. It's not my job to deliver a culture to the organization. I mean, I can hopefully maybe inspire some things within, but really it's everybody. So it's everyone's responsibility. That's the first thing. I do think like we're a subscriber to EOS, so we use our core values as a screen for hiring people and also as a screen for sort of reviewing people and determining if someone's not a good fit. So, this young lady yesterday, when I sat down with her, there'd been 3 other people that had interviewed her and scored her on the core values. So, either she exhibits or she doesn't, or we're not sure. And so we have 6 core values that we're screening on. And then we really try to call them out on a regular basis. But at the end of the day, it's really about working together as an aligned organization with mutual respect, trying to look out for each other and take care of each other and then accomplish something great together. No,
that's great. So, if you were to be talking to your 32-year-old self or whenever it was you started at M&A, what would you have told yourself could you have avoided that mistake?
Yes. Some things though, I think you just don't know until you go through them. And that's
fair.
And I think that's part of grit, right? Is you have to, somebody said to me last week, I stole this. But he said there's no losing. There's only winning and learning.
Yeah.
Right. And
I like that.
It's Dan Sullivan, strategic coach, is where that came from. So we'll give him proper credit. But there's only winning and learning. There is no losing. And I think that's you have to sort of get into that mindset, because you are going to make mistakes, and then it's how you process through the mistakes. And so I think one of the things I learned from that experience was I can do hard things.
Yeah.
When hard things come, I can rise to the occasion, and I can get past them. I don't know what the outcome necessarily will be, but I know that I can work hard and persevere and push through. And one of the things that was particularly inspiring for me at that moment, my kids were younger, but I was like, okay, how am I going to show up for my family in this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, am I just going to roll over and die and sort of wallow in this, or am I going to rise up and set an example? And so I was motivated by trying to show them what grit looks like.
Yeah.
I didn't use that term necessarily, but show them what grit looks like. And then we do talk about this story fairly often.
Yeah.
Because it's still real for me.
Yeah. Where did things end up? Can you share that?
Yeah. So we filed a lawsuit. We went to court. We had a mistrial because his attorney took a picture of the jury box. So we feel like that was somewhat intentional to create a mistrial scenario. And then we ended up arbitrating and settled, and we got a small check, relative to everything.
Yeah.
It was just
the amount of brain power you wasted on that whole thing.
And so I honestly haven't heard from him since.
Yeah.
Like, we finished the arbitration. I mean, he's still got a little practice. He took one of the guys that was with us with him, and I really don't even pay attention anymore. But
it's probably best.
Yeah.
Just leave those things behind.
Yeah.
So we talked about culture and building a great organization. How do you instill grit in your team? Because that's something I feel like you have to learn over time versus it being instilled. But
Yeah.
I'm curious how you do it.
Well, so one of our core values is run through walls.
Yeah,
and
I like that.
And one of them is restless pursuit of growth. And
Okay.
so those two things are sort of about grit. Like, run through walls is like, we will do anything we need to do in order to serve the client or serve each other or whatever. And then restless pursuit of growth is like, we always have to be growing personally, professionally, whatever.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of a grit factor in those two core values. And so we do talk about that. I think it's challenging because I think, I want to say this the right way. I think there's a tendency when you have success to relax and to kind of be like, oh, okay, it's all good. And, maybe we don't have to work as hard, or maybe we don't have to put in the hours, or we don't have to. And Mark and I, it was years before we could like relax.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just, I felt like we were on the, we're on the knife's edge for a long, long time. And so, but that made us better. And so, how do we do that as an organization? I think for us, it's this idea of constant growth, which means constant innovation, which means if you've had a relationship with a client for the last 10 years or whatever, don't just show up and keep doing the same thing every quarter when you meet with them. Like, figure out what it looks like to be out in front of that relationship and helping them solve problems that they don't yet know they have, and then supporting that as an organization. So I think it's challenging in today's environment where, people want to work from home more, and they want more flexible schedules. And, I feel like sometimes we're in an environment now where it's almost like a 4-day work week. And, it's like, because what got us here was this hard work and grit and determination and sort of, the grind factor. And while you want to provide a great environment for your people, you also want them to be able to operate on that edge, right?
Yeah.
We have always been a culture of work-life balance, so we're big believers in that. Mark and I've always, run our own lives that way, and we want to provide a place of work that provides that for all of our team members. So it's not about 80-hour weeks or 100-hour weeks. It's really about just excellence every single day when you show up. So It's not a great, I don't know that I have a particular answer, but these are just the things that I think about.
Well, it seems like the values really shape that whole grit and determination for your employees. What are you excited about in the years to come? You've been at this, 25 years now?
Well, so yes, True North's been around 25 years. I've actually been in the business 35 years.
Yeah.
So, I'm excited. I'm as excited today as I've ever been. When we started True North, I mentioned earlier, we wanted to build an enterprise. So we didn't want to just build a practice. And I think the thing that I didn't realize 25 years ago was it was going to take a lot longer than I thought. But we really do have the organization that we sort of envisioned 25 years ago. Just it took a lot longer, but we have it today. And so now there's this sort of responsibility of stewardship. Like how do we grow this and scale this beyond where it is today and do it with holding on to the core values and all the things that we stand for. So I'm super excited about, kind of where we are. I mentioned off camera before we took an outside partner, a strategic partner, a year and a half ago to help us with M&A. That's been an amazing relationship and is, sort of you're on this trajectory and then you add something like that and the trajectory changes. And we're experiencing that. And, in that there are things that we've talked to you about like AI and, how do we think about that as a business and, building up a compliance infrastructure and, building out your tech stack and like all these things that are foundational that will support the next phase of growth. So we're sort of in that now, and that's exciting. At the same time, I'm highly motivated by taking the younger members of our team and sort of sharing with them the things that I've learned over 35 years. So I'm particularly vested in our business development process for new relationships and teaching the organization how to do that. Something I've done now for 35 years. So I've got a few reps and hopefully like I can teach some things, I can shorten the learning curve for our organization by investing that time.
Awesome.
So those are the things I'm excited about.
Well, I'm sure you'll continue to be very successful at what you're doing, holding true to those core values. So as we're wrapping up this week's episode of The Grit Mindset, any kind of final thoughts to share with our listeners, people that are maybe starting a first entrepreneurial venture, maybe their first job, trying to figure out what to do? What words of wisdom would you drop?
Yeah, I think a couple things. So I'm in the strategic coaching program. And so one of the things they do every quarter when we get together, we have a 30-minute segment where people just share the stuff they're reading. Mm-hmm. And one of the books that was shared last quarter was a book called Shoveling Shit. I don't know if you've read it or heard of it.
I need to get that one.
Yeah, so I haven't read it, but I don't know that I need to read it because I know exactly what it's about, it's all about the entrepreneurial journey. And it's kind of like, look, you have this sort of grandiose idea of what being an entrepreneur looks like, and you read Inc. magazine and you
sounds
see,
really sexy.
You see the highlight reel, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like it's a lot of shoveling shit.
Yeah.
Like that's just kind of what you're going to do for potentially years, mm-hmm. right? As you build an enterprise or build an organization. And so I would just probably say like it's going to take longer. It's going to be harder. There's going to be more problems than probably what you anticipated, but if you just keep showing up every day and persevering, like great things will happen.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, very inspirational message. Thanks for coming on the show and sharing your story.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Yeah, it's been awesome. So for our listeners out there, hopefully some key takeaways and get yourself a copy of Shoveling Shit. I'm going to have to read that one. So this is Matt Rosen, your host of The Grit Mindset, signing off. Stay gritty out there.